Hey everybody, I'm Lindsay Berra, head of content at Mustard, and we are here with Gene Watson, who is the director of player personnel for the Chicago White Sox, but he's been in scouting for almost 25 years. He was with the Royals, the Braves, the Padres, the Marlins. He was part of two World Series championship teams. So he's been around the block a little bit, and he's going to share some insights with us about scouting and how scouts look at players and what's important and what's not important, what you shouldn't get all wrapped up in. Um, but first, I would just like him to tell us how he got into baseball, because everybody's stories they're always crazy.
Very crazy. Lindsay, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Um, yeah, I basically started as a player. I was a terrible high school player. Was cut from my high school team three times. My junior year, after I was cut, the no pass, no play rule in Texas, after the first 6 weeks, allowed me to go back on the team. And it was really a football background, a high school football program that was really strong. And so during baseball season, I got to go back on the team. And about 5 games in, we were getting killed at a game in Georgetown. And one of my coaches said, "Hey, you want to pitch?" And I went out and threw 5 shutout innings,
Oh,
beat one of the top teams in the state of Texas the next week. And my pitching career kind of began and took it into my senior year, got tendonitis my senior year, but walked on to a NAIA school in Austin, Texas, called St. Edward's University, a private Catholic school in Austin. And after 1 year, just getting a little bit better, I decided to transfer to the University of Texas at Arlington, where I played for 3 seasons. In 1990, we won the Southland Conference Championship and went to the regional and got beat by Texas and Clemson. And from that, in 1991, I got hit in the face against Texas Christian. Decided that my career was over, and a week later, the Rangers hired me to work in the home clubhouse. So I did that from 91 to August of 93, and then went to work for the Houston Astros as a part-time scout in the Central Texas corridor. So it's kind of been a crazy ride over 35 years, 8 organizations, 4 World Series, 2 World Championships, and a lot of fun along the way. So it's been a crazy journey.
and just to close the loop with Team Mustard here in 1991, Tom House is with the Texas Rangers, correct?
Tom was unbelievable to me. I actually had his locker, and there was never a time where Tom wasn't with Bobby Valentine or in a meeting with the pitchers or in the weight room with Nolan, where I wasn't 5 feet away, just soaking his knowledge up and his wisdom up. And the thing that I would say about Tom House is he was way ahead of his time as an innovator with where the game has gone, not only with weight training but pitch shape, pitch design, and just not only in baseball, but in all facets of athletics. And truly one of the most brilliant guys I've ever been around in my life, and a true blessing and a great friend. I think the world of him.
So when you were back then with Tom and he was trying to, do all this forward link thinking stuff, did people think he was nuts?
Not really. I mean, he was too smart for people to think he was nuts. He wasn't like the mad professor. I mean, he really had all the information to back it up. Our strength and conditioning coach, Marty Stadjahar, and him worked closely together. And when you think about some of the arms we had at that time, we had Nolan Ryan and Bobby Witt and Goose Gossage and Floyd Bannister. We had some of the top arms in the game at the time. So there was always so much experience and wisdom and information to work with that nobody really felt that way. He just was very convicted and was always trying to find the next thing that was going to make a player better, and he was certainly successful at it.
I've known Goose since I was a little kid. Goose Gossage is a fun guy to
Yeah,
be around too.
he's the best.
So big overarching question here. How has the scouting process changed over the course of your time in baseball?
Well, everybody goes right to the analytics part of it. And I've never worked one day without analytics being a part of my job. In 1996, in the winter of 96, I was hired by the San Diego Padres to be one of the first professional scouts in the organization. There's layers of scouts. There's your amateur scouts that see high school, junior college, and four-year universities. You've got your advanced scout that's out in front of the team that you're about to play. And at that time, nobody had really had a pro department. So I was one of the first pro scouts that the Padres ever hired. My boss, Eddie Epstein, was truly one of the innovators of analytics or statistical analysis at that time. And so Eddie would compile all his data and information on players. I would go in and see the teams in the Florida State and Texas League. Once I was finished with the 5 teams and had written my reports, I would then lean on what his analytical viewpoint was or his statistical analysis viewpoint was. So right away, I learned that there was a perfect blend. And the first thing that I learned was it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray to this. And so that's probably been the biggest thing for me is the analytics coming on. And as it evolved, and the data became greater and the pitch shape, pitch design world came into play, you just continue to evolve and grow with it, knowing that the most important thing is the heart and mind of the player. You always want to take that into consideration. It's a player's game. It always will be. And so you've got to make sure that as you're applying the data and the analytics, the pitch shape to pitch design, that player is fully understanding all of it. And there's sometimes where players are in a situation that they're not comfortable with. And if you have the information on that and you think you can bring them into your organization and make them better, you got a chance to win in the margins and in the gray area of where the analytic world and the pure scouting world have collided.
So the way you mentioned the structure, it's the amateur scouts who would be looking at the high schools, the junior colleges, the kids that we would have basically on this Mustard call. How do they decide where they're going, who they're looking at? Nowadays college recruiting is so influenced by social media. Does that come into play with amateur scouts as well?
Well, it's so different now, even in the last 3 to 4 years, when you've got the cutting of the rounds in the draft and cutting of teams in the minor leagues, the number of restrictions that are now placed in minor league baseball. It used to be that teams could have upwards of 220, 230 players in their organizations at one time. And now that number has been cut down to 165. So from that standpoint, the vehicle to enter professional baseball has become a lot harder. With all the showcases and events that take place around the country, you tend to have a lot of information on the players at a much younger age. There's always been a little bit of separation between the Latin American player and their system and their format and the American player, their system and their format entering the major league draft. And so I think it's just become a little bit more cloudy when it comes to the number of players that are getting opportunities. But certainly the amateur scouts, they use their resources, their high school coaches, the larger events to create their follow lists, and they go from there and evaluating the players throughout the amateur system.
At what age do they start to really take a player seriously?
My gosh, in Latin America, now it's 12 and 13 years old because
that's crazy.
You sign those guys at 16, but the agreement really begins to take place, towards 14 and 15 years old. But your relationship with the Buscones and in the academies down there are one of the most important parts of even having a pool of players. So you've got to be really strong in Latin America and really connected with the Buscones to create that pool of players. And then as the American draft goes, I always say that the social aspects of the player begin to take place at like 15 years old. So I think players going into their sophomore years of high school begin to move onto the radar as far as being evaluated for the next level.
And when you say the social aspects, what are you looking at?
Today, it's peers, it's social media, it's distractions such as cars. It's a lot of things that, that's probably the one thing that I say to players the most is you can have all the tools in the world. You can be as gifted as the next guy, but if you don't separate yourself in the way you go about your business in the weight room, in the classroom, on social media, what your coaches and players think of you as a teammate, you're really putting yourself behind the 8 ball when it comes to getting another opportunity.
And what, from an athletic standpoint, are you looking for in a player that young?
Well, we're looking for athletes that can run fast, throw far, jump high, guys that are super athletic. We evaluate the 5 tools: the hit tool, the power tool, the run tool, the defensive tool, and the arm grade. And the sixth tool would be the makeup of the player. So you're throwing all of those physical tools into a melting pot and just, taking each tool by position, be it catcher, second base, shortstop, third base, the outfield. Those tools are all ranked differently by position. So what you're trying to do, first of all, is create a profile for the player, whether they're power hitters that don't run, but they've got arm strength, or whether they're guys that can really run, that don't hit for power, but they make contact. You're just creating that profile, taking the top three tools of the five I gave you and evaluating them, ranking them, and then just coming up with an overall future potential grade of the player.
Does it matter to you, or do you care if the athlete has specialized in baseball at that point, or do you prefer to see someone who's played multiple sports?
Lindsay, I don't think you can generalize. I think every player is different. Again, as I said earlier, the heart and mind of the player is the most important thing. There are some players that are physically gifted. They were born with God-given tools that separate them from a player that may not be as skilled athletically, but their baseball acumen's off the charts and they really know how to play. And so that three-sport, five-tool player, may be more capable of going out and playing multiple sports, where maybe an undersized player that doesn't fit on the football field or the basketball field just focuses on baseball and to be the best possible baseball player that they can be. But I don't think you can ever generalize on that. I think it's up to the player and the family and what their aspirations are, what their vision of the future is for them. And the most important thing to me is that players are having fun doing what they're doing and loving what they're doing and doing the best that they can to improve at that sport, whatever it is.
When you look at guys and you're rating them as a second baseman or a catcher or a right fielder, how often do you look at a guy and you say, all right, like he's all right at right field, but I think he'd make a great second baseman, and try to pursue him for a different position than he's actually playing?
Typically, you don't go from the grass to the dirt. Typically, it's dirt to the grass.
Either way, that was my mistake.
What you could have sometimes, and I've seen it with, for instance, Michael Barrett was a gifted shortstop that the Expos made a Gold Glove catcher. Adam Jones was a shortstop that probably could have played at shortstop, but they had Yuniesky Betancourt and others that were playing in the infield, and they felt like he could be a multiple Gold Glove winning center fielder, and he was. And so I don't think there's any perfect formula to that. The thing that is important, like when you're profiling run producers or run scorers that are going to hit the top of the bottom of the order or in the middle of the order, that's where the tools kind of split themselves up with the offensive profile. Guys that are going to be above average hit, above average power guys with arm strength are typically your wing infielders and your wing outfielders. Guys that are runners, base stealers, contact, not a lot of power for the most part, are your middle of the diamond players, and your catchers that can really throw. Those guys are going to be behind the plate. And so you're just watching the player, envisioning what they're going to look like at 23, 24 years old, and putting them in the best possible place to succeed and continue to develop as a player.
How does it change things, like, if you've got a 22-year-old Derek Jeter as your shortstop, or you have a 22-year-old Yogi Berra as your catcher, and they're going to be there for a very long time, and the best player you see is a shortstop or a catcher, do you go after that guy and try to make him do something else? Do you take the best player available, or
always take the best player, because you never know what's going to happen. This thing moves really fast by the hour at the major league level. But you always take the best player, because even if you have a Hall of Fame caliber player at any one position on the field, the control of that player is always important. What you have coming behind it is important, not only for your organization, but say you've got a chance to win the World Series and you want to go get a number one starter. That high-end, high-ceiling player is always going to be the capital that you have to go get that player. So in any circumstance, you never really go on inventory. You always go on taking the best player you possibly get every day.
What are the most appealing character traits for you in a player? Is there anything particular you look for in a way they behave?
There is, one, I really like to try to get to know the player if I can. That's not always the easiest thing to do, especially in my job doing pro coverage, because the players are property of other organizations. But like the last 3 weeks, I've been out seeing amateurs for the draft, and you get to the ballpark early. You hope to be able to say hello to them, ask them a baseball question, try to get a feel for what their baseball acumen is, how does their mind work. Then you watch them work on the field, how they go about their business. Do they take pride in their craft? Are they working, or are they just going through the motions? And the bigger thing for me is when you're talking about winning a world championship and building a world championship roster, you got to have 9 leaders on the field, and you got to have guys with a killer instinct. When you're talking about going into Yankee Stadium or Dodger Stadium or Truist Field and beating those teams, you better have 9 guys that believe they can win and compete and be great teammates. And that's probably the one bigger thing for me is, going and watching these kids and seeing how they interact with their teammates, what their coaches think about them. Because as you assimilate into professional baseball, it is a true grind. The lifestyle is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly hard to play even one day at the major league level. And so you've got to have guys that are ultra driven, ultra focused, and have a desire to be the best player that they can be.
We did a college recruiting class with some coaches from the Ivy League schools from Princeton and from Cornell, and Coach Pep from Cornell said that one of the things he always does is look to see how a player treats his mother. So I'm wondering if you have any little on the side tricks like that.
100%. And I would tell you that it's a little different in pro ball than college. College, they're not just recruiting the player, they're recruiting the family. But in professional baseball, we do want to know what we're going to be up against as far as the maintenance of the player with regards to their family and their agent. It's a big deal because this is not an easy game. There's going to be bumps in the road. You got to have a great vision for the player, and sometimes if your vision for the player is not aligned with the player, their agent, their family, you can have some difficulties along the way. So it's really all encompassing when you're talking about acquiring the player.
You mentioned you want 9 leaders on the field. Someone commented on my LinkedIn post about this call and asked, she wanted to know how much a player's confidence level influences your opinion. And, at the amateur level, kids aren't always super confident. They may still be questioning themselves at that point, but they may also have a lot of skill. So how do you kind of sift through those waters?
That's the toughest part of our job, and it's very difficult because there's over 50,000 high schools in the United States, and if you're the best player on your high school team, you're one of 50,000. We take 600 players in the draft. 2% of all high school players play collegiately, and 2% of all collegiate players play professionally. So that filter is so enormous that the players in professional baseball, you could literally have a player, let's just say from Austin Westlake High School in Austin, who is the best player in the state of Texas, Team USA, all everything, first round pick. And the day he shows up to professional baseball and walks in that clubhouse, there are kids from Caracas, Venezuela, Seoul, Korea, Santo Domingo. They have no idea where Austin, Texas even is, or Stanford University, or the University of Texas. And so those players being able to assimilate into the just the worldwide culture and how different it is. I mean, the very best players every year that walk in those clubhouses are now walking into a room where every player in the room is as good as they are. And so you got to have a guy that is, because everybody's going to struggle, whether it's in the minor leagues or at some point. Look at Jackson Holliday this year with the Orioles. He's one of the best players in the world, and he had his struggles in the major leagues this year. It doesn't take away from what kind of player he is, but how he handles the failure and gets back up off the mat ultimately decides how long it takes to do that. And he's a wonderful kid with a great baseball background, and he's certainly going to get back up and be very successful. But you want to have somebody that knows that when they go through the failures and they go through the hard times, that they're going to have the makeup to persevere and push through. And those are ultimately your star players at the major league level.
It's funny. It reminds me of the goofy story that Joe Garagiola, who grew up across the street from my grandfather, used to say. And for the young kids on here, Joe Garagiola was a catcher in the big leagues and won a World Series with the Cardinals. And he used to say, when you make the big leagues, you're usually the best player in your high school, the best player in your town. But with Yogi across the street, I wasn't even the best player on my block. So there's always somebody better, always somebody coming up, nipping at your heels, right?
That's right.
We have a question in the Q&A here. Tom House always talks about late bloomers. Based on your description of today's scouting process, how does a late bloomer get noticed? And Tom always does say that a lot of the best players in the big leagues really were late bloomers. They didn't specialize until later in high school.
Look at the closer with the Oakland A's right now, Mason Miller. He was a D3 guy. I mean, I can give you 1,000 stories of guys that eliminated the perception of what select team they played for, what college they were going to, who their coaches were, which is a lot of the battles with the amateur game right now. Is everybody thinks because they're tied to a particular organization that makes them a better player. It doesn't. It just means you play for that organization. And I can tell you, as a director of player personnel, I don't care who you play for. We're out evaluating every player on every possible stage that we possibly can. And so late bloomers to me are, first of all, they're physical. They've got very strong minds. They know what it looks like to get there. And I can give you stories of like JD Martinez, who was designated for assignment, Justin Turner, Chris Taylor, Brent Rooker, who was an all-star last year, designated for assignment twice, that they had this inner drive, this inner fire to never stop improving as a player. And so understanding what kind of player you are and what you bring to the table and demonstrating those tools every time you step on the field, but also understanding where your limitations are and the things you've got to improve on, taking the time to work on the things you're not good at while staying sharp at the good things you are good at, and just getting on the field and playing, and that light bulb coming on one day ultimately will decide, what your ceiling is and how far you're going to go in the game. But more than anything, it's getting past the perceptions of, if I'm at a junior college, if I'm at a D2 or a D3, I'm not going to have an opportunity to get better, because that's certainly not the case in today's environment.
It kind of goes into another question we have in the Q&A. Keith says he has a family member who plays in a major D1 school, and there's a good chance he'll get drafted. But he wants to know where the information gaps exist for scouts when they're looking at college players, what kind of information they should focus on getting out there outside of highlights and stats that are helpful to scouts to get a player noticed.
It's really, with Division I schools, it's really cut and dry. I mean, the area guys have such a track record with the Division I players, really from their sophomore year in high school. If they didn't see it, they will track it, who they played for, what summer programs, what high school, what positions they played, things that might have happened to them along the way, adversity wise. But really, the Division I schools, they do such a great job of communicating with the scouts. I've been at major D1 universities the last 3 weekends and just talking to coaches and digging in on their viewpoint of the player. There's really not a lot of secrets. Now, there again can be players that are not comfortable in their environment that you believe. I saw a picture this last weekend that is not having the best college season, but I still have the same level of interest in him because I know the makeup of the player. I know that once he gets into professional ball in a less competitive situation in the minor leagues than trying to win the SEC or the Big 12 or whatever the conference is, and he can free himself up and go out and work on the things that he needs to get better on, he's going to be a better player. And so there's a little bit of that when evaluating the players, and it's certainly the vision of the scout and, again, their wisdom and their history and Rolodex on players that allows them to kind of jump out and see that in another player. From an information standpoint, though, today it's with all the analytics and the data and the relationships, it's really pretty black and white with the Division I players.
You've been at this a long time now, and I feel like it's always interesting to hear the stories. You can learn a lot from actual specific circumstances. So over the course of 25 years, who are the players that you were like, I found that guy and this was the process and it's a great story? Who are those diamonds in the rough?
Well, one of the responsibilities that I'm in charge of is the Rule 5 draft. Was in charge of it in Kansas City for 15 years. Guys like Joaquin Soria, Brad Keller, who's now pitching for us in Chicago. There have been a lot of buy low guys, what we call them, where they haven't really reached their ceiling with an organization. Brent Rooker was a guy I was a part of trading for last year, who we let go of and ended up being an all-star in Oakland. Cole Reagans was a guy that I fought really hard for last year in Kansas City. He was a one-inning reliever in the major leagues. We acquire him, put him in the rotation. Now he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. So it's a little different on the pro side than actually being on the amateur side and tracking that player throughout their career. But the funny thing about it is, it doesn't matter if you're an amateur, pro, or major league scout. You're going to stay convicted on certain players, and some of them are just not going to figure it out. There's going to be something that keeps them from reaching their ceiling, and there's going to be a player with lesser tools that you walk by that you don't know the heart of the player, you don't know the mind of the player, and you walk by them because their tools are not extraordinary, and they end up playing 10 years in the big leagues. So there's not a scout in the world that would tell you they've gotten every player right and every player wrong. And every one of them would tell you they've got great stories on both sides where things either worked out in a great way or didn't work out at all.
So the 1 inning reliever, what do you see in a 1 inning reliever that makes you think he can be in the rotation?
First and foremost, clean delivery, an inline delivery with a great takeaway out of the glove. There's 4 components of a fastball: velocity, life, command, and deception. Showing me those 4 components of a fastball: high spin to the breaking ball and the ability to throw it for a strike, a usable third pitch. But the biggest thing is the competitiveness of the pitcher. If there's a guy on the mound that's competing, controlling the running game, showing those fastball components with good secondary pitches, I'm going to take a flyer on that guy. Now, there's always context to the acquire and risk to the acquire and ceiling to the player. And so when you're presenting a player, those are the 3 things that I always try to present: context, risk, and ceiling. And then you make the best possible decision that you can on the player.
Stay on the pitching topic here. Go to some of our Discord questions. How do scouts assess pitching prospects in terms of long-term health, or is it focused more on velocity and pitch type, as that is what pays in the current game?
Great question. I think I went over most of it just now, but
Yeah.
I think we've got a real problem in our game today. And first of all, these are just my opinions. Doesn't make me right or wrong. It's just from my experience in the game. Bert Blyleven, 300 plus innings, multiple years. Nolan Ryan, 250 plus innings, multiple years. You look back at the history of time in the game and the pitching and what guys were able to accomplish back in the day, as far as numbers of starts, innings pitched in a season, innings pitched over careers. And it's not even close now. We have more sports science than ever. We have more data than ever. We have more information than ever. We spend more money than ever, and the injuries have never been greater. And so I would just love to see what would happen, and if it went back to maybe less information, less chasing stuff, less pitch shape, less pitch design, and let's get back to the fundamental principles of pitching. Like I said earlier, commanding your fastball, controlling the running game, using your secondary, sequencing. Everybody says that the 3rd time through the order, batting averages go up. A pitcher with 3 pitches that knows how to sequence those 3 pitchers, there's no reason in the world they can't get 3 times through the batting order. But we have sold and played to this narrative in our industry that that's just the way it is. It's the way it's always going to be. And I don't believe that. I believe that if you get a group of pitchers and you convince them to go out and compete, number 1, use their stuff in a fashionable way. Number 2, and take the training wheels off. We're already getting hurt more than ever. Tommy Johns are at an all-time high. If somebody's willing to commit to that philosophy and try to reprogram and rewire our amateur system and the things we're focusing on, I think that we can improve the health of our arms long term. And I say this to almost every parent and family that I talk to. I non-prospect 95 miles an hour every day. This isn't a carnival. We're not trying to hit 3 little balloons or 3 little balls in a carnival stand. You've got to show command of your fastball, life to your fastball. You've got to be able to command it to both sides of the plate. You've got to be able to land a breaking ball consistently for strikes. You've got to be able to demonstrate a third pitch, and you've got to be able to control the running game and compete. And we never talk about that. All we ever hear and see on Twitter is velocity and guys throwing as hard as they can into a net. And there's so much more to pitching to that. And I think that if we can get back as an industry to making it more of a well-rounded pitcher, I think some of these injuries are going to go down.
Do
That's
you
not, that's
see it
my
going
opinion.
that way?
I do
How
not.
how do we get I mean, it makes so much sense. It sounds so logical, and yet it just seems like it's impossible.
I know. And I believe there's 60 plus major league starters on the IL right now making millions and millions of dollars. And we just don't want to reel it back in. But for, the 2% of high school kids going to try to get to college baseball and the 2% of college baseball players trying to get to pro ball, there's no better formula than what I just told you. Have yourself prepared to pitch, to command your fastball to both sides of the plate, to have a good breaking ball that you can land for strikes, to sequence in a third pitch, and to control the running game. If you can do those things, Bryce Elder is pitching in the big leagues for the best team in baseball, one of the best teams in baseball, and he throws 91 miles an hour, and he's successful. And so, again, you can't generalize on players, but I feel like that, especially on our amateur side, everybody's being sold such a bill of goods on velocity that we're really missing the boat in developing pitchers. Just a personal view. Nobody hate me for it.
No, I wish Tom were here because he would be just, nodding his head and I know he believes all of that wholeheartedly. I'm going to go also to the Q&A here, a little shift. You mentioned players' floor and ceiling. How do you look at a player and decide what the floor is and what the ceiling is when you're just looking at the player in that moment in time?
So from a position player standpoint, we grade on a 20 to 80 scale. 20 is me. 50 is just a solid, average, everyday player. An 80 is Shohei Ohtani. So when you take the run, field, hit for power, and defensive grade, and you rank those top three tools for the position, anything 6s, 7s, and 8s, those are your high ceiling players. They're your all-stars, your superstars. Now, them being able to get to those tool grades is a component of it. Do they strike out a lot? All of those things factor in. And then you've got players with, kind of 40 to 60 grades, and how they apply those grades. What are their size? What's their physical attributes? What does 162 games do to his body compared to a monster that's physically stronger? That all factors in. So the ceiling is the high end of the tools, the floor is the low end of the tools. And then you've got players that, they don't have an average tool across the board, but they know how to play the game. And every time they step on the field, they're going to give you everything they got. Those are mostly utility guys, but you could sneak in as an everyday player on a team that's got a lot of stars around you. The David Ecksteins of the world, if anybody remembers him, just a relentless pursuit to play at the major league level. And so that's really when you're evaluating the tools and the ability for the player to apply the tools. How you grade them out ultimately creates the ceiling and the floor.
As the analytics have gotten more and more important and we attach numbers to everything, is it harder? Like, do you have to fight harder for players who don't have an average score across the board, but you see something in? Is it harder to get those players a chance than it used to be?
There's no question. Not even the average players. Some of the really good players, because again, it's not black and white, and there's a ton of gray, and especially the guys with big power and high swing and miss. Let's say you have a guy with big power and high swing and miss that's playing in St. Louis, and he's playing with Matt Holliday and Albert Pujols and that group of hitters. You can hide that guy in that lineup and give him a little protection, and there may be a little less swing and miss because he's getting more balls in the zone because they don't want to face the next guy. Take that same player out of that lineup, out of that ballpark, put him in a bigger ballpark with less protection. Now the swing and miss is going to be a little bit greater because you don't have the players around you to protect you. And so those are the type of things that I try to look for, but it definitely factors into the acquire. And you've really got the tools, statistics, role makeup, and risk of the player are the things that you really have to tactfully present every day. and stay convicted to your belief in the player. And if you really want the player, you got to flip a few tables and try to get your way. But that's really what you're looking for in that area.
Can you tactfully flip a few tables?
There's no way tactfully you can, but I flipped a few. So
Um, Eric asks, are we seeing a degradation in quality of play overall with amateurs focusing on showcasing?
great question, 110%. And I'll give you some examples. One is we live in such a fast-paced society now. Baseball is slow. They've done a tremendous job with the pitch clock at the collegiate professional level. But really, at your 12, 13, 14-year-old levels, we've always kind of combated one thing. And the one thing from 12 to 14, where 80% of the dropout exists in the amateur level, it's always been football. And I'll give you a couple examples. As a kid that grew up in Texas and went to a football powerhouse, Temple High School, Temple, Texas, 4 draft picks last 2 years. They just, when they get to 15, when you get to 15 and you're entering your freshman year, here's what families have the choice of. You can play 7-on-7 football, which I don't even know if that's a thing anymore, but I know you got to be in the weight room, and you can play 7-on-7 football. And when you graduate from high school, you have a chance to get a full ride, 4-year, full dollar amount scholarship to whatever school, Division I or otherwise. Baseball, you at 15 and 16, you enter a system where it's $1,000 a fall, it's $2,500 a summer, and your investment for those 3 years to even get a commitment now, you've invested so much money that you probably could have paid for college for a chance to get an 11.7 scholarship. Now that's the biggest. Look at guys like Pat Mahomes, whose dad pitched in the big leagues, who was a baseball prospect, ran to football. Kyler Murray, whose uncle was a great player, whose dad played professional baseball, ran to football. Those are two of the better, NFL quarterbacks to come out of the state of Texas. Drew Brees, Austin Westlake High School. Robert Griffin, Coppers Cove High School. Johnny Manziel, Kerrville Tivy. All of these guys, Baker Mayfield, Lake Travis, all of them were great baseball players that ran to football. The system was just set up better for them. Now, in today's society in 2024, you look at not only football, but look at what lacrosse and soccer are doing in the United States right now, taking off. And so baseball has a real problem right now. We have an identity issue in our amateur system, in that the system is not set up to keep players playing the game to give them a chance to play at the next level. It's too expensive for a lot of players to play, and we're really eliminating a lot of the high-end players by doing that.
It kind of ties. So there's another question in the chat now. With colleges taking fewer high school players for scholarships, is there too much emphasis being placed on travel and showcases? I see so many dads pulling their sons off of high school teams to play travel because they believe they'll get more exposure for college.
So this is an example I would give. In 2020, when the pandemic hit and the minor leagues had to go to alternate sites. In Kansas City, our alternate site was in Kansas City. We had arguably one of the best collections of pitching prospects in the game at the time. A lot of them are pitching at the major league level right now for the Royals. We also had a group of the best collection of young hitters at the time that had not really had the greatest season or seasons in minor league baseball. And here's what happened. They all had to go to an alt site, and there was no running away from how good those guys were on the mound. Our hitters had to learn how to hit every day against the best pitchers in the organization and in the minor leagues. It wasn't like you're going to Springfield or Tulsa or San Antonio or Corpus and you're facing the best guy on Tuesday night and you don't see him again until Sunday. You're getting a big arm every night. I believe the same thing about our youth system. There's something to be said about playing in your city against your friends and the camaraderie and the competition that comes with that, the banter that comes with that, the competition of knowing that I'm facing you, I've got to get you out, and I got to see you at school tomorrow, and having to adjust the next time you play them, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time. It's more experience by reputation and learning how to adjust because you're seeing the same players all the time. To get in your car and drive 8 hours to Sulphur, Louisiana, because you think the competition level is going to be that much greater at the age of 8 to 12 is insanity to me. And we did it. My son played 6 years of professional baseball, and we did the same things. But over time, you realize this is just a system, and it's not something that's really improving the players, because the same player you're facing in Sulphur, Louisiana is sitting there in your backyard and facing that guy more than the one time you're going to face being 10 hours away in the hotel, spending all that money. You have a greater chance of learning how to adjust and compete and be just as good a player as you are. So if I had my wish, families would get back into their communities, they get back into their leagues, especially from 6 to 14, and just, help each other grow as players, develop as players, and not create this financial pipeline that we've created throughout our country.
Do you believe that the way the system is now, that players do have a better chance of being noticed if they're with a travel organization and not with their high school? Like, I mean, I agree that the high school system.
Evan Carter's a pretty good player. Pretty good player. 2020, he didn't do any of the stuff. 5th-round pick of the Rangers. He's going to be an all-star. If you can play, we are going to find you. And I say that all the time. I believe with all my heart, not only because high school coaches, they're so great at their job but they have a network of coaches, college coaches. And that's how it was back in the day. You played good against another team, and, your coach knew the coach at Baylor or McLennan Community College or St. Edward's University, and they would help you get on. And if you can play, they are going to find you. So you should never feel like, and this is where it begins, when players, like the 15 to 18-year-old players right now, the horse has left the barn. You're never going to change that, those mindset and those families. But players coming into the game, the 6, 7-year-old families, if they would just say, we're going to play local, we're going to do the best we can, they're going to have fun, being a great teammate, and what the snack is after the game is the most important thing. Developing naturalness for the game is the most important thing, and playing within their communities. But we feel like if we're not keeping up with the Joneses, we're falling behind as players. And that is not true. If you can just get through the 12 to 14-year-old dropout rate, get into high school, continue to play summer ball, continue to get strong in the weight room, somebody is going to find you, and you're going to reach your ceiling as a player. And anybody that tells you otherwise is just selling you a bill of goods. And Evan Carter is a great example of that.
How important if people really believe that they're not going to get noticed, like, is social media a tool that they can use? How often do you look at kids and what they're doing on social media? Like, you are on Twitter. Do people, send you here's a video of my kid getting, how important is social media?
Well, it's just a very small snippet. I mean, I'll get videos every day of guys throwing 95 and they threw one strike in a 12-pitch bullpen, and they don't show a breaking ball, and you don't see them control the running game. You don't know how they compete. You don't know what kind of teammate they are, what kind of student they are. And so, I mean, it can give you a little bit of information, but not the whole picture. And really, I certainly wouldn't make a decision on the player based on social media.
So I wonder if that's like a tidbit, like, if you're going to use social media, show something different, like
show game film, show game highlights.
Yeah. Rich in the chat wants to know, is there an inherent difference in the level of interest between right-handed and left-handed pitching prospects? And if so, what separates them other than their throwing hand? And he hopes that makes sense.
Well, yeah, I'm left-handed. Well, there's left-handed, I think it's 4% of the world. So, you're always if there's 2 guys on the board and one's left and one's right, you're always going to go left. If all the information ties together. The 2 best players I've seen in the country amateur-wise this year, one's right, one's left. I'm going to go left, and I'm not going to tell you who it is. But there's such a slimmer chance of acquiring that left-handed power arm or that left-handed power bat, that you tend to give a little bit of favoritism to them if it's little separation between the two.
We've got one from Discord. The question won't mean much to the room, but I'll bet his answer will. What's the best lesson you learned from Mike Arbuckle?
Oh my gosh, there's too many to even tell. Mike Arbuckle has been one of the greatest influences of my scouting career.
Okay, wait. Tell us who Mike Arbuckle is, because I
Mike
don't.
Arbuckle is the senior advisor to scouting and player development for the Kansas City Royals. He's forgotten more baseball than I have ever learned. But just a tremendous human being, first of all, him and his wife, Martha, unbelievable. Just the lessons in really breaking down a player and seeing like really what the player is going to be long term and how he's going to fit long term, and just the stories. I mean, he oversaw player development scouting of one of the best organizations in baseball for a long time. It's a crying shame he's not a general manager today. More than qualified to be a general manager, but certainly an enormous influence on my life and my career.
You've been around a long time. We were talking earlier, like you spent some time around my grandpa. You knew Tom House for a very long time. You sent me a photo of you and Tommy John. There's so many people in this game to learn from, right? Like so you pal around with Tommy John. What do you learn from Tommy John?
You know, pitching has always kind of been my strength, and Tom was certainly, one of the bigger parts of that early in my career. And, we had Goose Gossage, Nolan Ryan, Floyd Bannister. I've talked about these guys before. And then on the scouting side, I always gravitated to guys like Bruce Keeson, Pete Vukovich, Charlie Kerfield. Nolan Ryan and I talk pitching all the time and its evolution and where it's gone to, and what some of the struggles are with the game today. And so you take again, it's not black and white, but you take a little bit of piece of, like, I've taken a little bit of piece of every Claude Osteen, every little pitching coach that I've ever been around, because if you ever stop learning, you're just narrowing your chance to have more growth. And if you take all the information all the information I've ever been given from Bruce Keeson, Charlie Kerfield, Tom House, Claude Osteen, Nolan Ryan, Goose Gossage, take all of that coupled with the evaluations, 25 years, 25 teams, 25 players a roster, it's like 16,000 players. If you're combining those things, you're always going to continue to improve. And when you walk into a ballpark, it hits you right away, the yes or the no, and then the why, the yes or the no, hits you right away. And that, again, that's another thing that Mike taught me, is like, don't just make a decision quickly on a player. Really dig in and break that player down, and what the little adjustments that can be made to make that player a better player and reach their ceiling. So I don't think it's any one person or one thing. I think it's being open-minded to a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different experiences, and just using each of them in every decision you make.
I'm going to tick through some of the questions in our last 10 minutes here. At what age do in-game results start to matter in terms of how indicative they are of a player's projectability?
It's kind of funny. They don't really matter at 12 to 14. Naturalness for the game. Go out and make mistakes on the base paths. Learn how to play off your feet, play off balance, take chances. Then you get into high school and you're playing for your school, and winning matters. It matters. And then you get into summer ball, and summer ball should be playtime. You should be working on one of your weaknesses to improve that weaknesses in game, to make adjustments with your swing, give 50 at-bats away to do something different, to be a better player. Then if you go off to play Division I baseball, winning matters again. You don't have an opportunity. If you're a projection player and you've got to continue to grow in development, you don't have that opportunity in the SEC or Big 12. You got to win today. And your opportunities in between those white lines are performance-based. I wrote a pitcher up today at a major Big 12 school, and the last line of my report was, this player will take off when he can be in a less non-competitive situation where he can be freed up to try different things to learn to develop. And that's what the minor leagues are ultimately. It's a league for you to improve your game, work on things. Because if there wasn't a minor leagues, everybody just goes straight to the big leagues. And so that's kind of the really sad part for me with players is that when a player, and I had a son, we had stars in our eyes with him, played at a Big 12 school, transferred to a JUCO, got drafted out of the JUCO. The real sad part for me is when you try to tell a player, if you go to this school, you're going to get the ball every Friday, and whether you win or lose, you're going to get the ball next Friday. But they go to this school because they're on TV, they got the cool uniforms, but they're never going to play there. Yeah. And that's a real unfortunate situation for a kid that has a chance to be a really good player. And so I always play it pretty straight up with the parents. I tell them I won't lie to them. I'll give them a test balloon on where the industry truly sees them, and then let them make the best decision for their families. But it's unfortunate when a kid has a chance to be a better player in 3 years, but they don't go to some place where they can play and get better.
Aside from the winning, when you start to get to high school and that becomes important, what are the metrics that stand out individually for evaluating players at that age?
Well, velocity matters, but Yordano Ventura threw 85 miles an hour at 17 years old. He had a lot of looseness to his delivery. You knew he was going to get bigger and stronger, and the ball was going to jump out of his hands eventually. How do they spin the ball? Again, it's a little, and I mean, my gosh, you could ask every professional baseball player in the minor leagues, and they would tell you that not all of them had great high school experiences. They just continued to play and get bigger and stronger and continue to develop as pitchers. My high school experience wasn't great. And I ran with a mid-major school for 3 years. It was a tremendous experience. And so I don't know that you can play into all the metrics. What's more important is that the player has the heart and the mind and the desire to get better and work. And hopefully between summer ball and high school, they're going to get an opportunity to put themselves in a situation to, in between the white lines, demonstrate their ability to improve and reach their ceiling.
And in a way, guys who struggle in high school, who stick with it, that is indicative of a player who really loves the game and is having fun in spite of the struggle. And that's probably
no question.
Itself.
And there's a lot of high school players that know they're not going to the next level. They want to play high school baseball and be with their friends and compete, and they know they're going to the next level. I take exception to the pitcher only a lot of times. I don't think there's a high school player in the country that can't be the fourth team first baseman or the extra outfielder and just enjoy the game. Doesn't mean they're going to play, doesn't mean they're going to get at bats, but the pitcher only aspect, that's an awfully slippery slope for a 16, 17, 18-year-old that just loves to play baseball.
Yeah. I was an outfielder, but every now and then I wanted to play third base. What new and exciting technologies are you either using today or will you look to use in the next year or two?
Well, Hawkeye's become a really big thing. Obviously, we have a new thing on our phones called Baseball Resource, where I was sitting at Dodger Stadium Monday night, and as the pitches was being thrown, we got all the metrics of the pitch. Ohtani hit the home run to left center. We got the metrics of the home run. So more in-game usage of that information is something that I've tried to use. The TrackMan data is something we're always going to use. But beyond that, it's taking every form of information, using every opinion that you possibly can to make the best decision for the organization that you have to work toward.
You guys, we're getting down to the end here, so if you've got questions, put them in the chat. I want to go back a little. You said before, when you drop in on players at high school level or other go see amateurs play, you ask them a baseball question. Are there any like top 5 baseball questions that you ask a player to kind of see how their brain works?
Who their favorite player is,
okay,
and why. Who their favorite team is and why. And then like last week, a kid that's going to go in the first round, in the cage, he was working on something. And in BP on the field, he was working on something else. And so when we met, I said to him, hey, in the cage, you were tied to your hands and you had a little lift to your swing. And in the field, you stayed more inside the ball, used the whole field. It was more of a linear approach. And he went into this long explanation as to why he did what he did and told me everything I needed to know about his hitting acumen. And it was off the charts. So just little questions like that.
Who's your favorite player of all time?
Nolan Ryan,
Why?
because he's the man. That's my hero.
Cool.
He shaped
Um,
my life, shaped, he's the best I've ever been around, ever.
he's a good man. Last question here from Eric. What's the biggest change in scouting you've seen, and will we get back to more boots on the ground?
The biggest change to scouting that I've seen is not no scouts in the major league ballparks, which to me is I'm just personally I'm just not for it. I think there's always something to be gained. There's always an advantage to be gained by being in the press room, talking to writers, talking to radio people, talking to television people, going down and watching BP, taking coaches that you know to dinner, getting information on players. Guys going through something at home with his family. A guy's mad at the front office because of this. This is why all that information is all encompassing, and what we have from an information standpoint, I think is very important, and it's very useful. But again, the game is not black and white. There's a ton of gray, and to me, if you want to win in the margins, you have scouts in major league ballparks constantly gathering information to see where players are personally in their personal lives, in their careers, and just a chance for them to come into your organization to make your organization better.
Do you think we'll get back to that?
I know the Chicago White Sox are.
That's good. I mean, you really just want the press box food.
That's it.
All right. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Next week, we have Tom House doing a mechanics call. So if you want your pitching delivery analyzed by the great Tom House, send it to Steve Campos in Discord, or you can message us on Instagram or Twitter. Pretty easy to find. But Gene, thank you so much for joining us. This was really fun. We will send your regards to Tom. I should have come armed with some stories, but I thought he might join us.
The best. And if anybody on this call ever needs anything, reach out to me on Twitter and the message. And if I can ever be of help, if you're ever at a ballpark I'm at, please come up and say hello. I'd love to meet you.
He's at Watson Gene A on Twitter, so no excuses for not reaching out to say hello. Gene, thank you so much. Really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Lindsay. Appreciate everybody. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.